Throughout Lent, I've been trying to do some thinking and some talking about what it means to make disciples. Indeed, a full-orbed understanding of what it means to make disciples that is involved in kind of sort of teaching the scriptures and theology and practices, the reality of formation, habits that we develop in our life. And a lot of that work, a lot of what I've talked about thus far has been really some of the orientation that we have towards this sort of upward relationship, this vertical relationship that we have with God, in terms of certainly understanding things theologically and scripturally and life of prayer and all of our habits and our disciplines. But I do think there are other things that we need to sort of also think about as we are shaping and forming people in discipleship, and that's paying attention certainly to this sort of that upward relationship, the vertical relationship with God is really very important, that we are encouraging that. And I think generally speaking, we tend to be pretty good at that. But there are two other kind of directions that I think that are really important that we pay attention to and teach people to pay attention to in their spiritual lives. And the first one is sort of the inward life, how we pay attention to the inward life of our faith, how we are connected to our faith inwardly. And indeed, I guess almost the question is understanding and paying attention to what's going on in our lives inside. One of the struggles we have as Christians is we don't have a good understanding of how we should sort of deal with our feelings, except that we're usually told not to trust them because they're not reliable. And that is not necessarily the most helpful way of thinking about them. Feelings exist and they are real and they are part of something we need to pay attention to in terms of our discipleship. What they must not be is the final arbiter of how we make decisions. They are data points that are important. How I am responding to a situation, how I am responding even for my kind of internal feeling about my relationship with God is information that is important that we pay attention to. Ignoring how we feel, ignoring our inward life, our emotional realities, leads us often to places where, oddly, those emotional realities rule us in a kind of a different way, where we are not paying attention to them, and all of a sudden perhaps I'm not paying attention to the fact that I'm feeling frustrated and angry, then all of a sudden, boom, it explodes somewhere. The reality of discipleship is about shaping and forming and paying attention to what's going on in our inward life with God, our inward life with others, how we are responding in different ways. And that's part of what discipleship means, that I might be master of my inward life, not a victim thereof. And so it's really important that I pay attention and I notice that. But the other thing is there's another thing that's sort of more outward, and it's about how the spiritual life is kind of moves us outward. It's very easy for us as Christians to focus entirely on our spiritual lives as exactly our spiritual lives, this sense of how I'm growing in my faith, how I'm understanding how I am being theologically developed and how I'm being biblically developed and getting all the information, and growing internally. But if our life is all about me getting better or me growing personally and me in my life with Jesus, I've kind of missed the point. Paul says in his letter to the Corinthians, if I speak in the tongues of men and angels, but have not love, I am a clanging gong. There's this sense that without an outward focus, a sense of life that is focused on others, that has a connection that is, in some senses, sacrificial towards others, we've missed the point of discipleship. It is that scenario where we have been going to Bible studies for 30 years, but we have never served the poor. Or we have been studying this and taking all of these classes, but we have never done anything sacrificial for another. That's to miss the point of what Christian discipleship is. Jesus came and gave his life for us. That's the picture of salvation, but it's also a model about what our lives are. Our lives are to be given for others. So there is a dynamic in the Christian life that has to be trained in discipleship that is also outward focused. Discipleship is all of these things. It is about biblical understanding. It's about theological understanding. It's about habits. It's about living forgiveness. It's that upward and vertical relationship. It's paying attention to our internal and emotional lives without them ruling us. but it's also understanding that my Christian life also needs to be outward focused. Discipleship is a many-orbed and broad thing. Formation of Christians includes all of these things. And as we think about how we are being formed personally and how we are forming others, all of these things need to be considered as part of what it means to make disciples for Jesus Christ.